It's interesting that when we were preparing for this program, and it has been a while because in the interim, my father was quite sick. My father was quite ill. And the doctors told me when I arrived in the United States, not quite a year ago, but they told me that his life could only be measured now in a matter of hours. Perhaps a day or two. And the oncologist said generously he could live a week. And I was trying not to cry because I was surrounded by a number of physicians that were all caring for my father, and I didn't want to do anything that would pause the conversation. I wanted to gather as much information as possible. But when parents are older, it's a tremendous fear because you know that you have an appointment with destiny. And my father really, he was struggling with Yenemaisa, stage 4. For those who don't know, there is no such thing as stage 5. And if you looked at him, you would know that. But prayers began all over the world. And my father lived for more than 7 months. 7 months he had life. It was a marvelous thing. He was living and living and living. I thought, oh, I guess we're going to go this way till 120. You know, he would become acclimated to a desperate predicament. I really thought, I guess, you know, he has food, he has a feeding tube. I saw on the bottle it has an OU on it. Not kidding. And he had air, all the air he needed. And the prayers were reaching Shemayim, and I had wonderful conversations with him. He could not speak because the trach was in his neck, where his cancer was, but he could squeeze my finger and let me know his thoughts. And I'm very grateful, I'm very wealthy that I had those special 7 months with him. And it was a Motzi Shabbos, I don't know, a couple of hours after Havdalah, that I got a phone call from my sister, which in times like that, you don't want phone calls from your siblings. You dread every phone call. When you look at the caller ID and I see my sister on it, for all that time, it was terrifying. And she told me that Daddy was nifter. And I couldn't believe her. I said, it's not possible. What do you mean? She said he was nifter. And I can't get a hold of Faggy, my other sister. Call back the hospital. It's not possible. They must have made a mistake. Are you sure? In any case, the Levaya was very unique. I had never been to a Levaya in my life. I'd never seen a mace in my life. And when the hearse pulled up in front of where the Levaya was, I ran out to the hearse and I said to the man, a very nice frum Jew, I said, I want to see my father. He said, we already closed the coffin, we closed the urn. I can't do that. And I said to him, now, if you'd asked me 1 minute earlier, what would I do? I would never dream. But at that moment, I felt that it was, I looked at him. I'm a very easygoing person, those of you who know me. this is the way I am. But I just looked at him and I said, this is the last chance I have to see my dad. And he looked at me and he knew he knew. And he said, come over. I also always looked at the Torah that says that Kohanim, these are the family members to whom you can be metama, as not just permission, but I always viewed that as an encouragement. Doesn't necessarily mean that, but they opened the urn, pulled away the talus, and I saw his face and he was at peace. And I touched the side of his face. I don't think I ever spoke about that. And it was a source of peace, and of course, that image will never leave me. And when we were burying him, as I was burying him, I've never been in a cemetery. As I was burying him, it really occurred to me that I'm never going to see his caver again. Although there's an imperative for me to bury my dad, which overrides, but I knew that that override for me will not carry on, and the next time I'm going to see my father is in the resurrection of the dead, in Tchias HaMesim, which probably won't be a very long time. So I miss my father very, very much. So there's been this very long period, but I am comforted that we are living in a remarkable moment. A moment that seems to, in many ways, mimic the life of Yeshayahu himself, who was a Novi, who was a prophet. He was an oracular prophet who guided the nation with Nevuah for a very long period of time. A quarter of a century during the period of Uziyahu, who was his first cousin. During the time of Yotam, 16 years, who was a Tzaddik Gomer, the only king who never sinned. During the time of his son, Achaz, also ruled from the age of 20 until he was 36, also 16 years. He sinned a lot. And Chizkiyahu Melech was a king for 29 years, so he was a Navi for a very long time. And then his grandson, Menashe, murdered him. But he was a very, very old man. I remember I was once sitting in a shir with Rav Igda Miller, many, many years ago. And someone asked him, how is it that such a holy man like Yeshayahu, he dies a violent death? He crawled into a tree to hide from Menashe, who was going to kill him. And his sisters were hanging out, and they cut him in half. It was a terrible misa mishuna. How could it be? A man so holy, he should die like that. So, I remember Avigdor Miller saying a few things, but one of these is he lived a really long time. He was a very, very old man. I mean, if those of you who are numerate could add up those numbers, he was a Navi for a huge amount of time, longer than most people live. And in his lifetime, he saw the lows and the highs. Imagine, he lived during the greatest catastrophe since Matan Torah, the destruction of the 10 northern tribes, carried off by Sancherib, the Assyrian Empire, and he saw the greatest miracle since Kriyas Yamsuf, the greatest miracle since the parting of the sea, when the Assyrian army was killed overnight in a miracle that took place on Pesach. And it's kind of, I think, our lives. We are living in a time of euphoric time. I mean, imagine for a moment, Kindlech, my holy brothers and sisters, imagine if we could speak, if I could speak to my Elta Zeda, my great-great-grandfather, who was a Savaya Veruv. He was a Hasidic rabbi in Hungary. I would tell him what's going on. He would say, wow, you're living mamish in Messianic times. So tell me more. Imagine if you could speak to the Abar Benel and describe to him, well, what do you have thought? Tell him we're back in Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim is, and he would say, wow, the Jewish people here, half of the Jews are living in Eretz Yisrael. Such a thing did not exist since the first Temple period. And then I would tell them, not about an event like what occurred in the spring of 1903, the Kishinev pogroms, where 49 Jews were murdered, or Kristallnacht in November of 1938, on Martin Luther's birthday, on the 10th day, 92 Jews were murdered, but we saw the most horrible thing occur, the greatest barbarism. In a certain level, in a certain strange way, it's a barbarism that was unknown. Even that, the Shoah was something unique, but this something remarkable. We are living in a time of extremes, and Tanakh is as alive to us today. The oracles we're going to explore today, and as we do it, we want to get the message behind it, are as meaningful today as when they were preached 2,700 years ago, right here in this city, right here in Yerushalayim, with Yeshayahu, together with Micha. They were here in Yerushalayim. In the north was Hosea, Amos, who was from here, but he was up north to the northern kingdom. It was all happening at this time. Imagine, and we're living here. When I explained that we're going to soar through Isaiah 28, going all the way to 35, the great highs, the great woes, there are 6 of them in these numinous chapters. So she said, you know what, Rabbi, I'm going to go over those chapters, just survey them, because I want to kind of be ready for this. Now, I didn't say anything. I said, great. But in my mind, I'm going, this should be interesting. Because as it turns out, Isaiah, which is almost all poetry, it doesn't mean chas v'chil, it's Shakespeare, but Isaiah is going to marshal and employ the most extraordinary use of language, symbolic language, which is highly dense. That's what's important. When we say poetry, doesn't mean that the words actually read like a sonnet or anything like that. It means that the language is highly symbolic and is highly dense. And a metaphor that's used is going to represent something extraordinarily numinous, and it's important for us to make sense of what's happening. And frankly, if you're not familiar with the context of Isaiah, you won't know what's going on. And many people read these chapters and they do find themselves completely lost. I know guys who I'm sure are much smarter than me that I went to yeshiva with, who came to Yeshayahu and they just closed the book after 3 chapters. There's just too much. It's very difficult. And as it turns out, the chapters we're going to explore, we're going to survey tonight. Let's see if we can make it through them, to give you a sense, to peer into a world which we are becoming familiar with. We'll explore them together. Isaiah uses not just extraordinary language, but he pays no attention to chronology. He's not interested in being a storyteller. I remember years ago, I was asked to speak at the University of Leeds. It's your country. It wasn't just me, but they brought in a whole series of bunch of scholars from around the world to lecture. And it was like, I don't remember, it was like 3 days or something like that. And I was asked to lecture on whatever it was at the time, I don't recall. But when I wasn't speaking, when I wasn't teaching, when I wasn't giving my assigned program, so of course I talked to people, but there were scholars who were invited who were speaking on different topics that somehow connect to Tanakh, somehow connect to Jewish scriptures. And I'll never forget this. There was one lady who's a professor of Old Testament from Cambridge University, and she was giving a lecture on the book of Isaiah. I said, this should be interesting. So I'm allowed to go to any of the other classes. So I sat there. I'll never forget this. I'm pretty sure she was just a Jewish lady. She was, had a professor at Cambridge. She's up there. And I'll never forget this. She began her lecture by saying that the book of Isaiah is a mess. That's how she began. The book of Isaiah is a mess. And it hurt me like a kick. Because it's said that she described it that way. Isaiah does not follow a chronology. Now, I know those of you who went to yeshiva know that we have rules and principles that, in fact, in the Torah is not necessarily bound by chronology, and there could be certain chapters that happen that appear later that actually occurred earlier. But you need some evidence for that, because generally speaking, the Torah is following a chronology. There are some commentators who are more bound to it should be in order and you need a lot of evidence, and some who are but it basically is following a chronology. It's not difficult to find, and certainly when you get to Yehoshua and Shoftim, Joshua and Judges, certainly they are following a chronology, certainly so. Isaiah has no interest in chronology at all, but rather Isaiah is employing a remarkable language and marshaling some of the most frequently used techniques to convey spiritual messages that we find all over Tanakh. And one of those methods that we're going to encounter this evening is a method that's all over Tanakh, and that's a method of using zvugim. You must know this. If you don't understand this, you cannot possibly understand Isaiah 28, 29, 30 and 31, 32, 33, 34, and 35 with Angel's Mashiach. Now you can only imagine, just like the 3 chapters we did prior, it begins with tremendous haichacha and tremendous rebuke and ends with Mashiach, as you can only imagine. We discussed the importance of this because after all, it's in this very same book in Isaiah that we are told that in order for Mashiach to come, the Jews must do tshuva. We say it in davening every day. Isaiah 59 verse 20. The Jews must do tshuva in order for Mashiach to come. He will only come to a nation that has repented, has turned back to the God of Israel. And the Almighty, blessed be His holy name, is tweaking history, is using devices in order to get us to do tshuva. We have to have bechira, so it has to be a real emistic, a real tshuva, but somehow it's going to happen. It'll happen in its time, or it'll hasten it, depending on how much pushing it takes, but it has to happen. And it's the Jewish people that will trigger it. What are zvugim? What is this concept? So it's really all over Tanakh, and zvugim means what you think it means. It means couples, right? If you find a good zivig, it means you find someone who's but zvugim in studying Tanakh means that the Hebrew scriptures, our sacred literature, repeatedly takes 2 people or 2 things and contrasts them side by side in order to saturate the image, in order to create a contrast so you get the point. This is very important in Tanakh. You always are finding zvugim wherever you go. L'mashal, for example, we are introduced to Avram Avinu, Abram, our father of blessed memory, in what chapter of the book of Genesis? Good. You guys are good, like this. This is the sharpest audience ever. That's sharp, but not like this one. I'm kidding. We are introduced to Abraham, our great-grandfather, in Genesis chapter 11. Most people don't notice it there. But as it turns out, Genesis 11 is very famous because it has 2 pericopes. Now you go, that's a fancy word, but it's good. You need to know that it means 2 collections of passages that belong together. For example, the first 9 psukim, verses of Genesis chapter 11 are devoted to the story of the building of the Tower of Babel. So that's a pericope, that's 1 unit. And what's the second unit? The second unit is, how does Genesis 11 end? We're introduced to Abraham's ancestry, and we know that Abraham came from a man who was not exactly the holiest person, but he had a brother who died, left over a daughter. We're given her medical files in that she's an akara, she can't bear children, and he marries her. And he marries her really as an act of a kind of yibum act to perpetuate the memory of his dead brother. So what was the grave sin of those who gathered to build a tower, a memorial? What were they really doing? They really were trying, the pasuk says, they were building a name for themselves. So the beginning of the chapter, we have one half of the partnership, and that is we have people who are gathering on a monumental project. After all, now they have the tools, the instruments, and the materials to be able to build tall towers, and they were devoted to building a name for themselves. Therefore, Biglal Zeh, the end of the chapter is a story about a man, one of the greatest men who ever lived, who was not looking to make a name for himself, rather to perpetuate the memory of his dead brother. And they belong together. The story of Avraham Avinu being thrown into Kivshin Eish is not in the Torah. I was not interested in that. That's not the key point I want you to know about Abraham. It's in our sacred literature that Abraham, when he saw his father's store that sold statues, I remember the stores like that in Indonesia, in Bali, because there's a lot of avodah zarah in Bali. So that story doesn't make it into the text either. These are fantastic events that occurred. Avraham Avinu was willing to die, not to worship idolatry. That doesn't make it in. That he went and in a very powerful way conveyed to his dad that these idols are hevel, and you're praying to something that can't save you. Through a very interesting, he destroyed them all, but left one with an axe in his hand. And it was it was really a particularly intriguing way of teaching, but it never made it in the Torah. The Torah was not that interested in that. As kids, we found those stories gripping. But the story that the Torah selected is that Avraham Avinu was not looking to make a name for himself, rather for somebody else. Oh, really? You're the kind of man I can work with. It is you that I'm going to build a great nation. In fact, in your name that you were not trying to make for yourself, all the nations of the world will be blessed. You weren't looking for a name. You weren't looking to be a Bal Gaiva. You weren't looking to preserve your own memory, but rather the memory of someone else, knowing that your wife couldn't even deliver babies for you. You're my man. And in fact, the last 39 chapters of the book of Genesis, which is devoted to the building of the Bnei Israel, is all about the descendants of Avraham Avinu. Genesis is about the building of a royal family, weeding out those who cannot possibly be a part of that family. We're going to come up in Isaiah briefly, we'll talk about it, the destruction of Edom. It comes up in Isaiah 34, which we're going to breeze through. I can't work with Esau, I can't do that. But this is a family like perfect, far from it. Were all the children of Yaakov Avinu perfect, bulletproof? No, but I can work with them. So so I gave you an example of a zivig. You have the door that built the tower and Avraham Avinu, and each of these events is there to add color and saturation, most importantly contrast, so we can see the godless, the uniqueness, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is after all talking to us when we read these numinous words. So that's what's going on. Or another example, you must know this, I want to drill this into your head, because without understanding this method that's all over Tanakh, you really won't understand any of this. Shimon and Levi go to the city who raped their sister, right? And these two brothers went and wiped out the city, right? When we see that when Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our father of blessed memory, when he was on his deathbed, and we say that he was blessing his children, but it's more than that. It doesn't really convey the story. He's really identifying the unique character of these children. So he curses the anger of Shimon and Levi. But what a different destiny they had. Shimon and Levi both shared this problematic feature to them of anger and rage and cost. But the question is, what are you going to do with that? And as it turns out, Shimon was in many ways a failure. In many ways he just tripped and Levi was able to marshal that quality and able to become a giant. Shimon, therefore, by the way, is the only tribe who they were so untrustworthy that their tribe is completely landlocked in Yehudah. We don't trust them to have any open aperture to their thing. So if you want to know where is the tribe of Shimon, so really everything from Yerushalayim, where we are now, and south is, we call it, it's Yehudah. But there is, right in the middle of it, this Shimon, and they're locked in. Why? Because we can't, Shimon is a problem. He's a shtick. He's to be brought in, but we can't let him have full access. He has to go through some border control if he's going to move out. You know, so those are zvugim. And it's very, it tells us something, that any character feature that we have, whatever it is, can be marshaled for good. Like salt we put on a challah. Salt makes it taste good. More importantly, for us, we don't appreciate it, but it preserves things. But salt you could destroy. In the ancient world, when one nation went to war with another nation, they wanted to destroy it, they put salt on the ground and nothing would grow there, and that would be the end of them. Nothing would ever grow there. Salt is destroyed. Another very important couple, zivig in Tanakh, is Shaul and David. The first king from the tribe of Benjamin, and David from Shevet Yehuda. So these are powerful zvugim, powerful couples, and what is very striking about the both of them is they both really messed up in their lives. They did something that was very sinful. Both of them did. But what David did was a very terrible thing. If you're not sure, open up 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12, and you'll be convinced very quickly that it was horrible, it was a nightmare. And those weren't the first mistakes that he made in his life. Shaul also made mistakes, and not one, but a whole series of them. Listen up, kinderlich. I would submit, I put it out there for you, I would just suggest that a case can be made that what David did was much worse than what Shaul did. Certainly, if you read the text, it is not a stretch to think that what David did, and it was not one thing, but multiple things went on, and he not only did it, he did it to a person who was a ger, and it was a nightmare. It was terrible. People don't realize how bad it was because people frequently don't read the text. It's very easy to make the argument that David, who is the great success, his name is mentioned more frequently in Tanakh than anybody else, including Moshe Rabbeinu. The Mashiach's name is called David. But the case could easily be made, my holy brothers and sisters, that what David did was worse than what Shaul did. I'm not saying it's a lot, but it's very easy to feel that what Shaul did was bad. But if you look at the result, what happened to each of them? With Shaul, when he sinned by not wiping out Amalek and not wiping out everything that belonged to Amalek, the whole kingdom was ripped away from him. And this is the language of 1 Samuel chapter 15. It's very, very strong. You're finished, you're done. When you read it, really your heart goes out. It's sort of, you wonder, how did it happen that this is like such a great man? How did he go from there to there? How did that happen? But he just ripped apart, and his malchus is finished, is done. Never can go back to Binyamin. And David is able to make his way out of it. David is elevated so high that he is anointed while Shaul is king. He doesn't become a king while Shaul is king, but as a further jab to Shaul, the prophet Shmuel anoints David HaMelech. What's going on here? I think you could sniff this one out. The difference between these two personalities and how they handled sin is strikingly different. We intuitively think that the more significant the sin is, the more God is angry with us. And it's of course intuitive that way. The mistakes we've made in our lives, some of them are very serious, that I would never tell my wife. My wife would know. She would throw me out the window in a minute. If my husband would know, he'd never look at me again. So we very frequently think that God is very, very angry with us, and he knows, after all, we can keep a secret from our husbands, but we can't keep a secret from God. He knows everything. So certainly, he's done with me. Yeah, I'll go through all the maneuvers of being a religious Jew, but when I get up there, oh boy, it's waiting for me. He's so angry at me. We assume that God's rage at us is predicated on the severity of our iniquity. It's just intuitive that way. If you do something really horrible, so that's a felony. But as it turns out, it's very easy to see that that's not the case at all. And it's really what you do when you're confronted with your sin. In the case of Shaul, we have Shmuel hearing the sounds of the sheep, which he was supposed to wipe out, destroy everything on Molech. And he has, so one thing the King James does nicely is the elegant use of language. Where do I hear the bleating of the sheep? It's a Jacobean English term, like, what do I hear? What's going on? And it's kind of it's sort of a juridical kind of parable, like, what's going on? Why do I hear sheep? And what does Shaul do when he's confronted with his sin? That he did not wipe out the implacable enemy of Klal Yisrael, pure evil on this planet. He came up with an excuse. He came up with an excuse. He said, I'm saving the sheep, we'll bring this, that, and that. He came up with a reason. He does that earlier on as well. But this was very serious. He came up with an excuse. Conversely, in 2 Samuel, chapter 12, when the prophet Nathan, of blessed memory, using a juridical parable, also a little indirectly, tells David HaMelech in a private conversation, it's important, but I'm not going to explain to you why. If you'll ask, I'll explain. In a private conversation, when he is confronted with his sin, he says two words, Chatosi la Hashem, I have sinned before the Lord. Stop. No but, no however, no explanation, nothing. And the prophet turned to him and said, God has forgiven you of your iniquity. God forgave you. So this is very instructive for us when we're trying to measure, like, where do I stand with God? So to understand, and it works really in relationships too, I think. You know, think about people who you grew up with, who you're not speaking to any longer. A girl you went to school with, but she betrayed you. A person in your family you don't talk to anymore because you're so angry. But I would imagine if that person had come to you and said to you, you know, I sinned against you. I deeply regret what I did. I am so sorry. And I renounce what I did. And I'll never do that again. I'm sure, I feel a certain sense of confidence that things would not be where they are right now. But that never happened. When you're apologizing, it's a very good idea not to add in but or any kind of modification to explain it, but just say, I did wrong. And we are very apt to forgive. So I'd like to, if I may, and then we'll explode into Isaiah, I'd like to take this, I want to sort of take you in a little journey that I've been thinking about a lot for the last couple of years, and that is, when we know that we are created in the image of God, that there's a divine spark in every one of us, so we instinctively think that means that we're sacred, that human life has infinite value, that we're not a chicken, we're not just a hive with a huge brain, but there's something spark of divinity. I want to, if I may, take you by the hand and walk you a little bit further with what that means. Because we are created in the image of God, whatever that means, it's metaphysical, but because we're created in the image of God, we have the characters of God dwelling in us. And we can really map God and understand Him in the way we respond. Now, we can never hope to be as merciful as God or as holy as God, but there is a commandment in Torah. I'm not making this up. Kadoshim Ktiyu, you should be holy. Why? Because I, the Lord, I'm holy, and therefore you have to be holy. You're created in my image. Just like God is merciful, you should be merciful. Does that mean it means really that we can see our own character, that we are apt to forgive those who confess their sin without any modifier, explain what we did. So we are apt to forgive. So we can know that comes, a chicken doesn't act that way. We are created with Tselem Elokim. It gives us an insight into the ways of our Kodesh Baruch Hu. And our role in life is to reach that remarkable place. What comes into view here in Isaiah? Now that we understand how Zvugim work in Tanakh, this is a methodology that's employed everywhere, always one against the other. And right now I know your brain is going, and you're going, well, I can think of a lot of these, okay? But they're they're vital for us to be able to create contrast so we can see the letters, so we can see the message in a way that's crystalline, in a way that's clear. What are the zvugim that are operating here in Isaiah chapter 28 and on? And that is our two kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Neither of them is perfect by a long shot. After Shlomo HaMelech, after King Solomon was nifter, and just the 32nd version, his son becomes king. There was a civil war over taxes. Go no. A civil war over taxes, and the northern kingdom breaks away from the southern kingdom, and basically you have two kingdoms that last for quite a while. Sometimes they got along, sometimes they went to war with each other. But the northern kingdom was an absolute nightmare, and it was irredeemable. And somehow, some way, the southern kingdom, although it made numerous mistakes, which is going to come into view right here in Isaiah 28, drunken mistakes. But somehow, the kingdom of Yehudah is going to somehow find a way to God. It's going to find that moment of connection where it can be preserved. Isaiah 28 begins by describing Ephraim, the haughtiness of Ephraim. So Ephraim, in this case, is an idiomatic way of describing the northern kingdom of Israel. Arrogance, gaiva, drunk, hedonistic, completely lost itself. Isaiah uses this beautiful language, a fading flower. This is very big in Tanakh. You need to know this, Kindle. What does this mean, a fading flower? This is not Shakespearean. This is really, you know, if you imagine, you go to a rose bush and you look at a rose, it's really a beautiful thing. You can look at it, you stare at it, it's something gorgeous, right? Its colors, its symmetry, its patterns. You just marvel that this thing just grew out of the ground. Mamish can turn to Hashem and say, I love you, Hashem. Ya'udu Hashem kol ma'asecha. All your works praise you. You smell it. It's a beautiful fragrance. You gently touch it. It has this unique texture to it. Marvelous that this thing just grew out of the ground and just perfect. Just a marvel. Now, if you went over to that flower with a scissor and you cut off the branch and you put it down on the table, you go back to it the next day, pretty much looks the same. I notice a little bit the flower, the petals of the rose are a little bit schwach, they're a little weak, they're not, but it's basically looks the same. The smell, it's there. It's not as fragrant exactly as yesterday, but it's there. It looks pretty much the same. Come back the next day and the next day, and slowly this rose that has been cut off from its source, from its root, it loses its texture, its fragrance, and then it's lost completely, destroyed completely. This is a very important principle in Tanakh, and that is if you turn away from the God of Israel, your role is to be a light to the nations, no matter how from you are, and how I am sure that the first earliest Christians, the first generation, I can't say I'm sure, but it is reasonable to say the first Christians were just mistaken on a few small points. They certainly didn't believe in the Trinity, the Eucharist. There's a little later accretions. They made one little twitch, one little change, one little alteration, and then all it takes is a few dairis, a few generations, and it's literally unrecognizable of anything Jewish. I'm sure every one of you sitting in this room now has been in the old city of Jerusalem, and you're walking through the streets and you see Greek Orthodox priests walking by with outfits, helmets and outfits and shmatas and with silvers and things, and you're going, how did these people even think that there's any relationship between this and the Torah? Because you're believing in the Torah. We all thought, like, how'd you get there? With idols of Mary, and you're going, what happened to you? How did you go from there to there? So the first generation, this is what's happening to Ephraim. That's why the language that's used here is so powerful. That you're like that wilting flower. On the first day, on the first door of Christians, they were probably from. In fact, we see it in the Christian literature. But what happened? Please, if you're a Reformed Jew, don't be offended. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But when the Reform movement in the 19th century made decisions about what they believe and gathered and established what they don't believe in the famous Pittsburgh Platform of 1885, completely eviscerating the belief in the coming of Mashiach, the hope that a temple would ever be built. That's why they changed the name from synagogue to temple. And Orthodox synagogue. Now again, please never repeat what I'm saying to a Reformed Jew, because they mean well. I mean, they don't know any better. My father used to tell me they don't know any better. And in fact, it's a little late, but the Reform movement is trying to see if they can get back to tradition. But that was cataclysmic. In 1880, there were 250,000 Jews in the United States. Where are the grandchildren today? They quickly created a Hebrew Union prayer book, which took out anything to do with Ches Mesim, the resurrection of the dead, the redemption, and so on. And many of them did tshuva, of course. And we know many people like that. But many of them just were lost. What happened was, between 1880 and 1925, roughly 4 million Jews came to the United States, escaping the pogroms that were occurring in the Russian Empire, and it was an explosion of life. But being cut off means that you've stepped away so far that you come back 2 months later, you can't even see a rose anymore. There's nothing there. And the Torah tells us this in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9. It says that the covenant is eternal. It's unbreakable with Klal Yisrael, with corporate Israel, but no individual has that guarantee, and it's only extended to those who love me and keep my Torah. Why? Why are we an eternal nation? Because we have an eternal message. But if somebody says, Chas v'chalila, I don't want to be a part of the message, so then you can't be a part of the eternal nation. There's no reason for you to be a part. But what's happening is Hashem has great mercy. We're living in a remarkable time where Hashem's words that are conveyed through the prophet Isaiah in 43, verse 5 and 6, Hashem is going to call back neshamas. Of course, there's so many Jews who converted to other religions because they were oppressed. Now, they should have rather died than convert to Christianity, but they certainly did it under duress. That we see today an explosion of conversion to Judaism. What happened? Why would you do that now? Now, after the pogroms in the late 1800s, and the First World War and the Second World War on October 7th, now you want to be a Jew? If you had any brains in your head, run from the Jews. We're radioactive clearly. What do you want to come to the Jews? Get away. But Hashem says, I'm going to find you. I'm going to bring back my daughters and my sons. I'll find you even to the ends of the world. And there are many people sitting in this room right now who are a walking prophecy. And these words are conveyed in the 5th passage of this verse. After telling us that, look, Ephraim is being used as an example for who Isaiah is really after. Isaiah, it's important to remember, his primary audience was the southern kingdom of Judah, not the northern kingdom. It doesn't mean it had nothing to say, he did. But if you look, for instance, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, Isaiah is there. He only lists the Davidic kings, the kings of Judah. He doesn't list any of the northern kings. So Isaiah is now saying that only a remnant will be preserved. And look at you, the kingdom of Judah, look what you have done with yourselves. Going in the same way. You can't bear to hear the message of the prophet. He uses this, in verse 10, he uses this language, ki tzav latzav, tzav latzav, kav lakav, zer sham. It's one of the strangest verses. He repeats it over again in verse 13. When we're preaching to you, it's all to you. What does tzav latzav mean? It means, to you, it's like just a bunch of noise. Kav lakav, a line for a line. It's just, to you, we're talking to you. The prophets are speaking to you, and just noise. Or you're going, hey, I'm keeping commandments. Hey, I am engaged in practicing the ritual elements of Jewish law. As you already know, those who've joined me in the previous lectures on the book of Isaiah, the struggle of the Jew was not that he wasn't keeping Shabbos, and it was not that he wasn't davening, but rather there was no social justice. The excuse that the Ya'udó was using is, but I'm keeping all these laws. I'm keeping all these different gezer, all these little things here and there. Why are you angry at me? But there's no tzedakah or mishpat. So it's all gibberish to you. It's all, and you, what have you done? Now, as I mentioned at the outset of these chapters, they're going to be confronted with a catastrophic problem. It was a problem that Ahaz had imported. The problem, of course, was the Assyrian Empire that was coming to destroy it all. The Assyrian Empire came first for the northern kingdom of Israel in 3 massive waves. Ephraim, the northern kingdom, is destroyed. It's catastrophic. They refuse to repent. Now they try to get out of the problem, but how do they try to get out of the problem? They try to buy off another kingdom, and that is Egypt at the time, which is a very powerful force at the moment. So they said, hey, you Mitzrayim, would you come to our aid to protect us from these guys from the Assyrian Empire? And they gave away everything they had. They didn't follow the advice of the prophets, but rather they went to buy off, to pay off another powerful empire to save them from the Assyrian Empire. Rather than listening to the words of the prophet, they turned to a non-Jewish source, to Mitzrayim of all, to save them. Ya'udó was far from perfect. The southern kingdom, terrible mistakes. In fact, this very same mistakes that their brothers in the north had. But there was a very striking difference. When they were confronted with the same existential threat, where here Sanncher was not just had destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, but now he's coming after the southern kingdom. He's destroying hundreds of Jewish neighborhoods. More than 40 cities in the south are being destroyed. Chizkiyahu HaMelech, who the Navi tells us was the greatest Davidic king in history, he acts like Yaakov Avinu. He prays to Hashem in an extraordinary prayer. He tries to give them money that maybe he'll give, like Yaakov sent to Esav, he sent them gifts. And of course he prepared for war. But he turns to God and he makes this plea. You know, I'm sure you've wondered in your life, what sort of prayer does God listen to? How do I talk to him? Like, I know the organized prayer that's found in the Siddur, but like, what prayers work? And sometimes I pray for things. I pray for my marriage. I pray for my health. And I don't think God's listening to me. It's like, why? What prayers work in Tanakh when the prophets of blessed memory spoke to God? And their conversations are recorded within the sacred literature of our Tanakh. They were all doing the same thing. They were all doing the same thing. And I'd like to share this with you. What Yeshayihu does is, here you had Sancheiriv. He sent a filthy, dirty guy. His name was Rav Shaka. He was a Jew who converted and joined, I know you never heard of such a thing, but there are Jews who convert over and join the enemy, and then the most visceral enemies of Klal Yisrael, the worst. In fact, in Tanakh, we have a number of examples. We're told that there will be Jews who will fight alongside Gog and Magog, who fight on the other side, fight in Zechariah 14. There was a guy who contributed substantially to Aryan thinking, that's with a Y, to the Nazi view of the Jew as the inferior race. And he was a Jew. His name was Otto Winiger. He was a self-hating Jew. He's your example. A genius. He's writing philosophical works on the inferiority of the Jewish race, of the weakness of the Jewish race. He ultimately, of course, converts to Christianity, as they often do. And then one day, I think he was 21 years old. He was a flaming genius. PhDs all over the place, literally. But he locked his door and just blew his brains out. He tried to eviscerate the Jew in him by converting to Christianity. That didn't work, so the only way to destroy the Jew in him was to actually blow his brains out. He was a very young man. As it turns out, you have these. So here Rav Shaka is screaming in Lashon Kodesh. He knew Hebrew. And in the first temple, the Jews, the language of the Jew was, Lashon Kodesh was Hebrew. It wasn't Aramaic, that second temple period. And the Yeshayihu's representatives are begging him, could you speak Aramaic so they don't hear? So he says, Adarabah, Punk Fakir, just the opposite. I'm sure he didn't say Punk Fakir. He said, no, I'm going to speak. I want them to hear. You see, he said, you see the king, what Sancheiriv has done? He smashed through every other empire, every other kingdom. He destroyed them. What makes you think that if my king gave you thousands of horses, you wouldn't even be able to find the riders to be able to mount them and fight with them? You're going to stand up. Yeshayihu was really a giant. He takes the notes of what was recorded in this conversation between Rav Shaka and his own representatives. He goes into the Beis HaMikdash. No one ever did this before. He throws them really in front of the Holy of Holies, and he falls on the floor. And he makes a case for God. Now, what would we do? Here, the city, we're in Yerushalayim, and imagine Yerushalayim is surrounded by nearly 200,000 soldiers. This is a staggering number, even in the modern period. What we would all do is we'd scream, God save me, right? I mean, what would we do, right? And I'm sure there's times in your life where you said, God, please save me. My marriage is collapsing. God save me. My kid is not doing well. God save me. My mom is not doing well. God save me. That's not the case that Yeshayihu made. He said, Sancheiriv is cursing you. This is 2 Kings chapter 19. Sancheiriv is attacking you with his words. He's cursing you, the God of Israel. This filth has destroyed all these wicked nations and their false gods. And, unfortunately, from the north, destroyed them with their false gods. What would happen? What would happen if Sancheiriv were to be successful in his endeavor and he would destroy Jerusalem, where there's a true God? What would happen? The world would say the true God is no better than the false gods. And Isaiah walked over to Yeshayihu. Imagine him laying on the floor in front of all his setlach, in front of all of his notes. And Yeshayihu comes over to him. God has heard your prayers. That's greatness. Pesach night, Jews had their Seder, probably didn't think there would be another Seder coming. This would be their last. And when they woke up in the morning, the Assyrian Empire had lost 185,000 soldiers dead. That's how to talk to God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The marriage isn't going as well as it could be going. You know how your name will be raised up above every other name? If only my marriage would be wonderful. It's the case that Moshe Rabbeinu made with God when God said, look, step away from me because I'm going to wipe out the Jewish people because of what's going on over there. That's the case that Moshe Rabbeinu said, what? You took the Jews out of Egypt, brought them into the wilderness, everyone's going to hear that all the Jews died, you're starting over me, what are they going to say about you? When we want Mashiach now, why do we want Mashiach now? I'd give you a very good argument why we don't want Mashiach now. Why? Because every mitzvah we perform now, we get a tremendous schar, tremendous reward. It's our bank account. You every day go online and you can see. You're on film, the bracha, every tzedakah, your account goes flying through the ceiling. Mashiach will come, what's going to happen? The free will that we have now is not going to be there. We will know what is sweet will be sweet. What appears to be bitter will be bitter. We'll know it exactly. But we want Mashiach now is a very deep statement saying, even though the schar now is much better, the income is much better, but that your name will be magala, will be amplek, will be open for the world. I want it for you. See, sweethearts? That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu is putting us through these tremendous yisurim in a seder of events. Why? So all the world could see. So all the world can understand. In chapter 34, the destruction of the enemies, which we see not only in Isaiah 34, the enemies of Israel destroyed. Famously, we see in the easiest chapter in the book of Zechariah, chapter 12, famously in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, so that chapter 35 of Isaiah unfolds. The final redemption, the final light, when there'll be true justice in the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it all. He wants to have a relationship with you, and he loves Shabbos, but he wants it all, not one without the other. My dear brothers and sisters, I believe we are living in this time. Can't be sure of anything, but it certainly appears that way. We're living in a remarkable moment that, for a reason I cannot explain, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us to be the door to witness a geula. It appears that way. Events are unfolding that we're told about in the most sacred oracles of our history by the greatest men and women that ever lived. And why me and not Tovia Singher, who was murdered by the Nazis in 1944? He was a very holy man. Why? I have no idea. It's according to his wisdom. It's according to his knowledge. I say this to you, my dear brothers and sisters. It's important to know how to pray, how to say I'm sorry, not be obsessed with sin to the point that it sends you into idolatry. That's what Christianity has done. It is so obsessed with sin that it doesn't know how to make its way out of sin. I admire Christianity in a sense that it understands the problem of sin. But where it messes it up is it says, don't smoke, here's crack. It takes something much worse. No, don't do that. So with Christianity, they become so obsessed with sin that they can't find the refuah. And instead of looking for the refuah to the antidote to sin in Tanakh, they look for it in the Neoplatonic world of the Greco-Roman world. We're living in special times. We have an obligation not just to our generation, but all the generations that birthed us, to have that kind of relationship with God, to not become obsessed with sin that we don't know how to address it, to speak to other people whom we've hurt by saying, I'm sorry. No semicolon, no but, no however. It'll change things. It'll change things between you and your husband and you and your children. And it'll change things between you and the God who created us all. May we be zeicher to see the coming of the true Mashiach. B'mheira b'yameinu. Thank you so much for being tonight. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ואת נעשה בחפצו כל